Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. Let's give our attendees 2 more minutes to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to do a quick audio test. Aishita, if you could let me know if you could hear this. Perfect, fantastic. Okay, I should be sharing my screen now too. Aishita, can you see this on your end? Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, regardless of where you're located, we're happy to have you here. This is a demonstration on the Serverless Framework and how it not only helps you build serverless applications, but now has expanded its functionality to also help you manage the lifecycle of those applications. Meaning the Serverless Framework can help you develop, deploy, test, monitor, secure, alert, all of your serverless applications. It's meant to be the total solution for building all things serverless. In this demo, we're going to be building out a full stack serverless application. It's got a front end, it has a basic REST API, a simple database, and we're going to show you how the Serverless Framework helps you every step of the way of building and managing that full stack serverless application. In this demo, we're going to be covering a lot of features. There's a ton of stuff to go over. We've been working on the Serverless Framework for a long time. And we've also just introduced a ton of new functionality that we've been working on for almost 2 years. So there's a lot of stuff to cover here. The demonstration is going to be pretty feature rich. Spend a bit of time preparing and making sure all this is in good working order. So hopefully everything goes well. And I think we're going to go ahead and put the Q&A at the end. So we'll do this for about 40 minutes, and then we'll do 20 minutes of general discussion. If you have any questions, comments, anything, we'd be happy to chat about it. And I think we'll go ahead and get started here. My name is Austen Collins. I made the Serverless Framework back in 2015. I'm kind of an all-around cloud fanboy. And when I saw that they came out with AWS Lambda, I was convinced that this wasn't just kind of a side note AWS service. This was the future of how you do compute in the cloud. And I wanted to build all types of applications on top of this new super efficient compute service. However, I realized that if you're going to build an application on top of AWS Lambda using other serverless, other cloud services with serverless qualities, you have to really rethink how you build and operate your serverless applications. So I ended up making the serverless framework. That was back in 2015. Since then, I founded a company, Serverless Inc. We make great software development tools for building and operating serverless architectures. I'm also an AWS community hero. You could find me at my Twitter handle above. My email address is there as well. If you have any questions, you want to chat about anything, I'm available. And our company is at serverless.com. So let's start with why. This is why serverless. This is always a great starting point. And there are a lot of kind of hypotheses as to why this trend has kind of bubbled up to be one of the top IT trends currently. And this is my personal hypothesis, and that is to say that software is eating the world, but you will be eaten too if you try and build and maintain every aspect of your software yourself. Now, to break it down, every technology, every company seems to be becoming seems to be transforming into a technology company these days. It doesn't matter what sector you're in, what business you're in, whether you're in entertainment or finance or agriculture, everybody needs technology these days, and especially software, right? And we kind of find ourselves in this this pretty interesting time where things are moving incredibly fast, and it's almost like a hyper-competitive software era. And I think a lot of organizations, whether you're a large enterprise, SMB, or a startup, if you're looking to keep up, let alone lead in this new era, in this kind of hyper-competitive software era, I think a lot of organizations, these individuals too, are realizing they can't build and maintain every aspect of their software themselves. And they're increasingly looking to outsource as much as possible to the cloud, especially these new next generation cloud services that are auto-scaling, pay-per-execution, and that we all refer to as serverless services. And this has kind of given rise to the notion of a serverless application or a serverless architecture. And that is an architecture or an application that has radically low overhead and cost. And it mostly looks something like this. This is a basic serverless REST API. And you'll see a whole bunch of different services here. Some people call this the serverless architecture. Other people call it the service-full architecture. But the concept is that you're basically unbundling the app server, taking all the pieces that you kind of used to build and maintain yourself and outsourcing them to these higher order cloud services that are auto-scaling and pay-per-execution, aka serverless. So in here we have API Gateway. API Gateway is a serverless API gateway service. AWS Lambda is a serverless way of running code, again, auto-scaling pay-per-execution. AWS DynamoDB has a lot of serverless qualities. And the goal of all this is to, number one, move fast. You don't have to build and maintain these pieces yourself. You just use managed services, versions of them, as well as deliver applications or architectures that as a whole are using these exclusively. So as a whole, these architectures have radically low cost and overhead. So this is the serverless architecture. This is kind of behind the big IT trend. And however, there's a challenge here. And that is, if you want to end up in this lowest total cost of ownership scenario, where you're building this software that is 10x more efficient than any other kind of technology stack that's available right now, it does require you rethink how you build and manage your application. Great new architecture, incredible value proposition, but there are some differences. And those differences aren't just in the development phase. There are subtle differences and some not so subtle differences in every single phase of the application lifecycle. That is development, deployment, testing, monitoring, securing, how you enforce policies, how you deal with issues like vendor lock-in. And this is exactly what the serverless framework seeks to solve, right? Again, great value proposition, deliver software that's super efficient, but you do have to kind of rethink how you manage that architecture. And the serverless framework is here to try and make it very, very easy. The serverless framework essentially is, started as a CLI, and now it's expanding to be a CLI and a dashboard product, again, to cover the full application lifecycle. It's open source. It has probably the biggest open source community around that's serverless focused. We just hit our 30,000 star GitHub star mark, which is pretty exciting for us. Back in 2015, just never thought this would turn into such a big deal. but it clearly isn't for good reason. Additionally, the serverless framework is vendor agnostic. It works with all the major cloud providers, as well as supports some on-premise options like some of the Kubernetes-based serverless platforms. And the goal is to give you just a great vendor agnostic application experience so that you could use these different platforms without really having to change your tools and your workflow. And also the serverless framework, again, it's been around for a while and it's been widely adopted through the process. So we have everyone from startups to SMBs to large enterprise companies using the serverless framework in production for customer-facing use cases, high-volume workloads. Some of these companies are doing billions of invocations every single day of their serverless functions. So again, we're expanding the serverless framework. This is what we announced a couple weeks ago, and you know, the reason for this is simple. The serverless framework has been great for development and deploying serverless applications, but then all of our users had to then ask, hey, how do we test this? How do we monitor this? How do we secure it? How do we make sure that this is following our organizational policies? And how do we collaborate on this as effectively as a team? And it seemed like a lot of people were pulling a whole bunch of solutions, products off the shelf to try and solve this problem. And they kept asking us, like, look, could you just ship all these features out of the box with serverless framework? Because we really don't want to have to go cobble together a solution and possibly deal with a handful of different vendors. We just want this stuff to be solved. And we thought about it for a long time. And you know what? When it comes to serverless and reducing overhead and complexity in your software, this also just felt like the right way. Like a lot of this stuff should just be handled for you. Right when you get started with a great framework, not only does it help you model out your application, develop easier, but instantly as soon as you deploy, you should have a monitoring dashboard filled with real-time charts showing metrics. Alerts should be available, and you should actually perhaps even have to configure them. Let's see if we could actually use the knowledge that we have of your application model and your definition to set up alerts for you. So we've gone ahead and done that. So again, as soon as you deploy with Serverless Framework, you're going to get metrics out of the box. Alerts are going to be set up out of the box for you, without any configuration, as well as their testing features, security features, secrets management, all types of stuff, all baked in now. And again, for those of you who this might be new to, this is all free. You could use all these features for free within a certain limit. That limit is 1 million invocations per month. After 1 million invocations, a handful of these features, not all, because there is a big open source component to this, you'll have to pay to use. Here's the scope of functionality that we're covering today. We're shipping pretty aggressively, though. We've got a ton of stuff coming. I think the next couple of months are going to be particularly exciting. But the framework first starts with development and deployment. We give you a nice application model, a simple way of describing your serverless application, so that you don't kind of get lost in all the verbose cloud infrastructure configuration syntax. Instead, we enable you to deploy a handful of use cases that are ideal serverless use cases, like a REST API, data processing pipeline, some event-driven automation, file manipulation on S3 with the least amount of configuration. So developers really, really appreciate this. It tells a simple story of functions and events. The function is where you put your logic. This is kind of the code, what happens. And then a event right under that function. This is anything that could happen that triggers that code to run, whether it's the HTTP request or something was uploaded to an AWS S3 bucket. We now have testing features, as well as local emulation features built into the framework so that you don't have to deploy everything to test it and run it. We have monitoring alerting features. I spoke a bit about those already, as well as debugging features. We'll actually let you know whenever an error occurs in your functions within a minute or two, and we'll give you a stack trace view showing exactly where in your code that error is, as well as we'll even pull the log so you can see everything in one place. The goal is not to just let you know that something bad has happened, but to give you all the information you need to actually go solve the problem as fast as possible. We've got a really cool policy enforcement feature as well called Serverless Safeguards. This is great for developers are following organizational policies, but also it's kind of designed as just like a serverless linter. It's great just for personal use. If you're a developer and you don't want to do the wrong thing, this will give you best practice suggestions. It'll give you warnings. It'll even kind of block you if you're doing something that's that's a really bad idea. Again, all configurable. And then of course we have secrets management too, so that you could store secrets and reference them easily in your serverless.yaml application configuration, as well as access control. We even help you guard your cloud provider account credentials. And in this demonstration, we're going to be using AWS exclusively. Most of our features are the most mature on AWS, although we are rapidly expanding all of them to focus on Azure, Google, and a lot more in the near future. So that said, let's go ahead and get started. And just for your information, I can't see any of the Q&A stuff coming in, so I'll have to wait a little while to look at it. Ishita, who's helping me today, is Ishita. I'm chatting with you on Slack, so if there's anything that comes up, just send me a note on Slack, and I'll try and answer it in real time. Otherwise, let's go ahead and postpone questions until I guess until about 11:40 a.m. Pacific time. All right, so here's Serverless Framework. This is the GitHub repository. If you haven't seen it, you can find it at github.com/serverless/serverless. You'll see, again, pretty excited about this. We're at 31K GitHub stars now. And there's a massive community behind this. That's really where most of the value is, to be frank. Yes, it's a great tool, but it's really the people who've rallied around it, who are submitting pull requests, adding functionality every single day. A couple things that people love is that when a new feature is announced with AWS, usually it shows up within Serverless Framework within 24 hours. We just announced AWS Event Bridge support. That just came out. It's a pretty exciting way of doing pub sub flows and event-driven architectures on AWS. That we have full support for that. That was just added in. Just as an example of that. And then additionally, we've got a ton of example projects here. If you're looking for an easy way to get started, here are a bunch of example projects for different providers like AWS, OpenWhisk, Kubeless, Google, Azure, as well as examples in different runtimes, Node, Python, Java, Ruby, and a lot more, for all types of different use cases. So these are, you could pull these off the shelf, you could deploy them almost instantly. Some of them might have some build process or some dependencies you have to install, but each one has a README to guide you through it. So highly recommend you start here. And then additionally, our plugins. This is probably top 3 value propositions of the framework. The framework itself is just a plugin architecture. You can extend it or override it by installing plugins in your serverless.yaml file. And our community has built a ton of plugins. There are so many. We've only captured a few of them, well, probably like a few hundred of them here. But basically what these do, what these are most often used for, is expanding the amount of use cases you could do with the serverless framework. Like there's a great step functions plugin that's super popular, or customizing your workflow so that you can just modify parts of your workflow more easily. Say if you want to use Webpack, for example, there's a killer Webpack plugin. Or if you want to have a better offline experience, there's a fantastic serverless offline plugin. So can't recommend these enough. The serverless framework is made much better by our community who are working on these every single day. Lastly here, this is what we're going to be working on today. This is a brand new repository. We just put it up. It's at github.com/serverless/workshop. And in here is the full stack application that we're going to be demoing. The full stack application is designed to be a fairly simple application you can get up and running, but it also helps you actually show off the features of Serverless Framework. What it is a landing page, all built on serverless infrastructure, AWS S3, AWS Lambda, API Gateway, AWS DynamoDB, and this is for handling email submissions, pretty straightforward. But this also has a demo utilities panel. So when you click this demo utilities panel, there's a few things you could do to invoke your backend a bunch if you want to start filling your charts with some sample invocations. And you can also click some of these buttons to go trigger the backend to do some funky behaviors. For example, you can click a button to make the function crash that's powering your backend so that you can see the alerts show up in the dashboard. You could click the generate button to trigger an unusual duration so that your function runs for several seconds rather than only a few milliseconds. to trigger some alerts in the dashboard as well, or generate a timeout error by just causing the function to surpass its timeout limit. So this whole thing is designed so that you can get up and running pretty quickly, see all the functionality of the serverless framework, and even fill the dashboard with some sample data. So it might be kind of tricky to follow along because there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that I'm going to cover pretty quickly. But if you want to pull this down afterwards, this is where you'll find it. And there's a full walkthrough here covering all types of stuff you could do to test out the serverless framework in its entirety as well. Let's just set up this application. So let's get going here. I have this running, I have this all cloned locally on my computer. And you'll see that this application is divided up into 3 different parts here. The way Serverless Framework is kind of organized is it has this serverless.yaml file. And this serverless.yaml file is meant to not encapsulate your entire architecture. Actually, we recommend you break up your architecture into separate, what we call serverless services. This project file declares a serverless service. And that is because generally you don't want to have everything in one big infrastructure stack, right? Because then whenever you're making changes, you have this massive kind of risk that comes along with that, and this massive kind of like a blast radius, right? You really want to reduce that as much as possible. And also, we're big fans of developer autonomy here. So by keeping these, by making simpler infrastructure stacks, breaking your application down, it enables developer teams, developers themselves to work with more autonomy so they can work on a larger system without affecting that system as a whole. So in this application, we have 3 serverless services. We have a database service, and in here you'll see that there's a resources section, and every serverless.yaml under resources, if you're using AWS as the provider here, this becomes raw CloudFormation. So you can just put any raw CloudFormation you want in here. And in here is a DynamoDB table. That's what we're declaring. This whole thing is all about declaring a DynamoDB table and kind of helping you provision it easily, but then also exporting the outputs of that DynamoDB table so that you could use that in other serverless services. So here we're going to export the database name as well as the region that it's in. Up next, we have the REST API, and this is what a serverless framework, a serverless service commonly looks like. In here, again, you'll see the provider, you'll see the functions as well. People usually have up to about 6 functions. That's the average amount of functions in the serverless.yaml. And usually those functions are together because they they work with the same data model. Say like you have a user's data model and all these functions are doing CRUD operations on that, or these functions are part of a workflow or a data processing pipeline. So functions commonly travel in herds. It's kind of interesting, but usually related to a common purpose. So in here you'll see a simple function that is handling the form submissions on the back end. And it's declared with this little bit of syntax. You can see the runtime, the region up here. Anything you put in provider is applicable to all the functions in here, but a lot of these things, these properties can also be put at the function level if you want to have functions that have specific configurations. So this function has a few environment variables. You can see we're actually requiring in the outputs from the database service as well, and we're stashing those into the environment variables of this function. Additionally, you'll see here are where we have IAM role statements. So these are the permissions that your function needs in order to interact with other resources in your AWS account. And you'll see we're declaring pretty clearly here just that we want access to put items in this DynamoDB table. And again, we're referencing the outputs from that other serverless service. And then lastly here, we've got the front end. The front end is a simple, we have one extra service actually, which I'll get into afterwards. But here's the front end project. This one's simpler than ever. This is using a plugin called Serverless Finch, and you could use this and some custom configuration to easily deploy static websites to AWS S3. What we're deploying today is a React application. That is the application that of the screenshot that has a screenshot that I showed you. And there's a kind of a build process that we'll get into, but we're deploying all that to AWS S3. So a few things before getting started here. Number one, of course, you have to have an AWS account. Number two, you also have to set up your credentials, your access key credentials on AWS in order to allow the framework to go provision infrastructure resources on your AWS account. Of course, you have to have Node.js installed. The serverless framework is a Node.js tool, so you need to have that installed. And the serverless framework, you'll have to have that installed as well. In that workshop repository, there's detailed instructions as to how you could do all those things. But in the interest of time, I'm going to start moving through all this and getting to the features. There are a few things in here. Some of these have NPM dependencies, so you'll have to CD into them and install the NPM dependencies. So I know the REST API has NPM dependency to use the AWS SDK, so you could test locally. And then the front end is a create React app. So as is all too common in the front end world, there are a handful of dependencies that you have to install on the front end, but just run npm install to install all those dependencies. Up next, you'll want to log in before you get started to the Serverless Dashboard. And the Serverless Dashboard is where you're going to get all those sweet monitoring, alerting features out of the box. Let me do this front end. And if you run the serverless login command, it's going to open up in your browser the way to register or log into the serverless dashboard. So here I'll go ahead and log in. And if you're logging in for the first time, you're going to have to create an application as well as a tenant. A tenant is basically an organization. I've already done that. You can see I'm in my tenant right here, my org. This is just like a GitHub organization, basically. A tenant can contain one or multiple applications. And here's the application that I've created for this project. It's just called demos. And here you can see all the services. I've already deployed them, and this is what it looks like after you deploy. You can see all of them right here. You can see last activity as well as to when they were deployed. And yeah, you'll see database in here, the REST API, as well as the website. And if you expand these, you can see different instances of these services. So some people might have services deployed in multiple regions. So they might have the same service deployed in North America as well as Europe. So they might be practicing a multi-region architecture. So if you deploy the service into different regions, you'll see different instances of those services available here. Or you might just have these services running under different stages. So you can see all that right here under each service. Now, when you create your org and your application, you'll want to make sure that you go back to your Serverless Framework project file here and fill that out right at the top. So make sure you put in your org as well as your application right here. And this is going to enable you to start sharing state across all the services. It's going to enable you to access secrets that are shared across all services, have safeguards that are shared across all services, a bunch of features. So make sure this stuff is filled out, and you'll want to customize this name as well. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start playing with these features already. I know that was a lot of context, a lot of talking. So first up, we're going to show off serverless deployment here. I'm going to go ahead and deploy the backend, and we're going to see a few things when I do this. So I'm going to run serverless deploy. Serverless Framework runs on AWS CloudFormation. It basically compiles out to a larger AWS CloudFormation template. A whole bunch of different resources are added to that template depending on the simple syntax that you add in here. This is, again, one of the big value adds of the framework is that you don't have to deal with that verbose CloudFormation syntax. The framework will generate it for you, allowing you to focus on just business logic as well as events. So deployment is happening right now. And while that's running, I'm actually going to go ahead and just jump ahead to the dashboard. Here is what the dashboard looks like after a deployment and after you actually have some data in it. I'm jumping ahead here because deployment does take a few seconds. Oh, it looks like it finished. So here you'll see once you deploy the serverless framework project, it has a function as well as an HTTP event. That HTTP event will actually create an API gateway endpoint on AWS API Gateway and point it to this function for you automatically. And what you get is a serverless REST API. And you'll see the endpoint generated right here, as well as a link to the serverless dashboard. So if you click this, this would open up this view. And if you're just getting started, you won't see all this data in here. Again, I've already filled it with a lot of data. But the first thing you will see is a successful deployment here. So whenever a deployment happens, the Serverless Dashboard tracks it, and it'll show you the deployment in here, as well as any changes that might have occurred. And I'll show off that functionality in a second. We actually do a diff of your serverless.yaml. And the reason why this is pretty cool is that whenever you're debugging issues, it is so much more helpful to know when the last deployment has occurred. So for example, this is a common story that's told in the serverless dashboard. You'll see that a new error was detected by one of your Lambda functions. And again, all these alerts are set up for you automatically. So all you have to do is deploy with the serverless framework. And when unusual things or errors start happening, you'll get alerts immediately. But you'll see this. You'll see an error has occurred, and then it's so helpful to see when the last deployment was. Additionally, when you look in our charts, you can see deployments by dashed lines. So you can see whenever a deployment was made, and usually when you start to see some red and errors creeping up, it's easier to diagnose that maybe something happened in that last deployment that's causing the error. And again, if you click into some of these deployment records, you'll see when changes have occurred. So that was a basic deployment. You can see this up and running. Right now, we have our serverless backend up and running, as well as you'll want to deploy the database too. Actually, I should have deployed this first, but I'm kind of racing ahead to get through all these features. So this should have been deployed first, and then the backend should be deployed. You want to make sure that you have the database outputs accessible in the backend. And then last is the front end. So I'm going to go ahead and CD into the front end here. You could deploy this easily, but I'm also just going to run it locally so we could make any changes if we need to rapidly. So this is starting a development server locally of that front end, and you could see it right here. Here is our serverless email sign-up form. Now I'm going to go ahead and enter some sample data here, or a sample submission. And let's open up network requests. And you'll see that we posted the entry to the endpoint. It returned a 200. Which is great. I'm going to go back to the dashboard. Now the dashboard is real time, and you can actually see that one request already be populated right in here. So in the dashboard here, we're seeing two charts. We've got one chart measuring our function invocations. We've also have another chart measuring the actual API gateway endpoint. And you'll see both of these. The API gateway endpoint received a request, and the function received a request as well. This is fantastic because the function never tells the full story. You want to make sure you're able to see what's going on the API gateway side as well as the function, because oftentimes, and I have some proof for this, oftentimes you'll see a lot more errors showing up on the API gateway endpoint than the function, which you can see over here. And this helps you let you know that maybe something is misconfigured on API gateway. So we've deployed this. We have this running locally. We've entered a form submission. I'm going to go ahead and hammer this with using this utility panel with a handful of other requests so that we can start to see some data show up in the dashboard, as well as I'm going to go ahead and just click this button to crash the function on the back end so that we can see the alert being generated. And these, I've already generated a few alerts for these. These do take a couple minutes to populate sometimes, so I've generated some of these alerts in advance to show them off just to help speed along here. Okay, so over here, you'll see, let me go to 15 minutes. You'll see all these invocations start to pile in here. Additionally, let's go ahead and start looking at our alerting features. And let me go ahead and back up to about the last 7 days so that we could see all of the alerts that have been generated recently. So over here, we've got, we have serverless the deployment. We have a new error record that was generated right before I started this demo. So you can see what it looks like. Now, our instrumentation is pretty good. So again, first off, you don't have to configure anything. These alerts are set up for you automatically. And not only are they set up for you automatically, but whenever an error happens, and when you click that button, it generates the specific error, a self-inflicted function crash error. Whenever an error happens, we're going to show you a whole stack trace view right here in the console, as well as we're going to pull in the log so that you could actually see the entire log from that function invocation. So again, it's not just that something happened here. It's that you have everything you need to actually go ahead and solve the problem as fast as possible. So that is our error functionality. Usually these error alerts show up pretty quickly within a few minutes. Our goal is to try and reduce that time as much as possible. But again, out of the box, with the deployment with Serverless Framework, you have this functionality available to you immediately. Up next, we have some other alerts here that I want to show off. So here's an interesting one. When you click this button in here to generate an unusual function duration, I'll go ahead and just click it again right now. It's going to cause the function to run for a long time. And when you run the function for a long time, you'll start seeing a useful alert like this, approaching your timeout limit. So all of the, someone just asked about stack trace error alerts in PHP. We don't have those yet. Right now we have support for Node.js and Python. PHP is up next on our list. We're working quickly to get that implemented. Right now this functionality works for Python as well as Node.js. And all the other runtimes should be available within about a month here. So going back to this, whenever you have your functions, usually there's a default timeout, I think in Serverless Framework, of about 7 seconds. This is set to 6 seconds right here. However, when I click that button, I've set it up so that the function runs for about 5.8 seconds. And this generates the approaching timeout alert. You can see a nice helpful graph showing over the last 60 minutes what the average duration has been. It's been about 74 milliseconds. However, that one function invocation ran for about 5.8, looks like kind of 5.9 seconds total. And you can see a chart illustrating that pretty elegantly, as well as the timeout limit right here. So again, out of the box, don't have to set this up. We know what your application looks like, so we set this up for you. And we'll alert you whenever you're approaching this, because you don't want to hit a timeout limit, because then your function, whatever work is being performed there, won't complete. So this hopefully helps you avoid issues before they start. Up next, we will show you whenever a timeout has occurred. So there is another button in here to just generate a timeout error. And you'll see that show up right here. It'll say what the timeout period was that was set. It'll say the average duration that this has, as well as the number of timed out invocations right here, as well as give you some tips to go ahead and resolve the functionality. So that's a timeout error. Additionally, when errors start bumping up, when there are a lot of errors, you'll see that there's an unusual error rate alert that's generated automatically. And this will show you kind of errors in the last hour, compared to the median error rate over the last 48 hours. So this gives you quick information, a quick alert when errors start to escalate. Again, zero configuration, this is given to you out of the box. And then lastly, this is our error type alert that we already generated. Up next, let me go ahead and go into some of these charts right here with a little bit more detail. To scroll down, you'll see, again, API endpoint activity, because you want to see the full story, and serverless REST APIs is our #1 use case. We have other tracing features coming shortly here, but we wanted to really nail the experience for serverless APIs first and foremost. You can actually see what was deployed in your serverless service over here. So you can see functions on the left and go ahead and see the need to know information about that function, as well as the API endpoints that were deployed right here. You can go ahead and copy the curl command really easily, as well as just see the endpoint. So if you want to actually interact with that endpoint, all that information is here. And you can also see any output variables that were set. So if I go back real quick to the database service, you could see that this doesn't really have any functions or anything, so that's why these are empty. But you can see the database information that I was exporting from that service right here. So this is what's being exported from that service and being consumed by the REST API service. And I click some of those buttons so you can start to see the alerts pile in here as I was kind of moving along. Additionally, on the function invocation side, you can easily toggle through here to show errors only or errors and invocations. Again, dashed lines show deployments. Down here, you could see within the specific time frame, you could see total invocations, total errors, as well as cold starts. This is a great feature. Whenever you're trying to diagnose performance, it's really helpful to see the amount of cold starts that happen That is, whenever your function hasn't been called for, 5 to 20 minutes, often the cloud infrastructure provider will deprioritize it, and only on the next request it'll have to spin up the function in a new container, which does result in a bit more latency than usual. This is not a big issue these days, especially on AWS Lambda, because they've optimized that pretty well. Cold starts with Node.js, Python, and a few other runtimes just aren't something that we hear about, but this is a useful piece of data to know. Additionally, when you click on these charts, you can see basic totals. If you had more functions, it would show. I only have one function in this project, but this would show all the functions in that project as well as their totals. And furthermore, the errors. So you can see all the errors that are being generated by each function. So here we've got a timeout error as well as the random error that happens whenever this is the self-inflicted error that happens when I click that button. You can see total. You can see 5 occurrences right here. Again, and once you expand it, it'll pull one of the error invocations to populate the stack trace view as well as the log. And then, of course, the timeout error, you don't get a lot of information from this because the function actually times out and it's not able to collect any metrics or anything. But we will let you know that it happened and try and pull any logs that are available from this. So again, all this stuff out of the box, you don't have to set anything up, just deploy with Serverless Framework. Additionally, we do have a feature that's up and coming. It's still a bit in the works, but it's actually our Invocation Explorer. So if you want to drill in for more detail, there is an option to load this view. And if you request it, we'll set the feature flag on for you. But here you'll see you could easily toggle through, add different functions. Right here, you could set to show only errors, apply the filter, and it will show all the errors within the current time frame. Easily set the time frame right here. And the problem that this solves is, look, all this stuff that I showed before is on the service instance view is great for getting that general snapshot, understanding kind of how your serverless service is running at a glance. But if you want to drill in for more information and look at individual invocations, this is where we give you that power. And again, everything that Serverless Framework offers you works across multiple regions, all this stuff, and multiple AWS accounts. You could have your serverless applications spanning several AWS accounts, several AWS regions, and one of the big kind of underrated value props of all this functionality is that we centralize it for you. You don't have to go on a scavenger hunt across several AWS accounts and different sub-dashboards like the AWS API Gateway dashboard, or the Lambda dashboard, or CloudWatch logs dashboard to figure out what the heck is going on, right? All you have to do is deploy with Serverless Framework and you get all this stuff out of the box in a nice centralized view. So that's Invocation Explorer. I know I kind of sped through it, but if you want access to that, just ping us at hello@serverless.com and we'll enable it in your account, or just write us on Intercom. You could click this to chat with us at any time. So to quickly move along here, because I know I'm taking a little while, but there's a lot more to cover. In here, we have a few other essential features, like specifically stages. So in Serverless Framework, yes, there's an application concept, and that application can contain one or multiple services. I thought Ashita sent me a note about best practices around breaking a large monolith serverless.yaml file down into smaller units. So again, you want to try and keep your serverless.yamls pretty small. And if you haven't done that yet, the way you could do that now via Serverless Framework's new features is to simply just output you could output CloudFormation outputs in here, as well as any details from your serverless.yaml to other serverless.yaml projects. So this way you could start breaking up that large monolith across multiple serverless.yamls just by using the outputs feature. And again, the way you reference it in serverless.yaml is just use this syntax. It's our serverless variable syntax with the word state. So state is an ability. Here you'll reference the service. That's the full stack database service, and then what output you're referencing as well. Up next, or to go back to the staging feature. So stages is where all this configuration is kind of kept under kind of a common profile. So the great thing about Serverless Framework is it has built-in stage support. So you could easily swap out, you could set stage prod or dev, right in here. And the serverless framework will go create an entirely separate infrastructure stack, a whole separate copy of your application for you, depending on if you change the region or that stage setting. And if you're using serverless framework, this new application stages concept we have, all the data, the state, as well as our new, let me pull up a quick example here. I might not have one of these in here, but we also have a secrets management feature where you could actually reference secrets across, if you store them in the serverless dashboard, you can reference them across all your serverless services using this syntax. And all this data, whether it's application state or secrets, are different depending on the stage that you set. And the way that works is you create a stage in the application, in your application view. Here I've got a dev stage and a prod stage, and each stage can have a profile. And a profile is kind of where the magic happens. A profile is where you can store common configuration that you want to use for all your stages. So I have a dev profile and I have a production profile. If I click in on the dev profile here, I have a few things, but let me start with secrets because I was just speaking about that. Here, if you set secrets right here in one place, that's foo and then bar, I could add it and then save it. And then if this profile is set to the application stage, so again, I just added that secret and profile -dev. If that profile is set to the dev stage, which you can configure right here, therefore all the secrets that are in that profile are accessible via this stage, right? So this is, and that goes for secrets as well as service state outputs right here. So again, the goal of all this is that you could easily swap out your stages and you won't have to modify your configuration files at all. It should just swap out the state so that it points to the correct state coming from the correct service and the correct stage, as well as the correct secret. So if you're using Stripe, for example, and you want to put in your Stripe access key, you could have one for dev and one for production, and you just have to set the different ones in each profile. So that's how secret management works in a nutshell. Additionally, if you go into our next feature, we've got safeguards here. And safeguards, this is the feature that is kind of like a linter for serverless architectures. These are policies that run upon every single deployment. And it's up to you what policies you want to add. So if I go in here, I could title the policy, but we have a handful of pre-made ones that are available for you out of the box. So you could set, for example, what function names are allowed, what region names, what regions you could use, what runtimes you could use, what stage names you could use, the framework version you must use. You could put in a custom safeguard via JavaScript right here. You could also require a dead letter queue for all asynchronous Lambda functions, make sure that stack tags are required. Heck, even restrict deployment times to only happen on certain weekdays. So if I go ahead and click on one of these, I have allowed regions, so I selected that. The description is pre-filled, and I could title it, my orgs allowed regions right here. And then it's up to me what regions I'd like to set that could be used. So I already have this. I already have a handful of safeguards configured. And one quick note on these. You could set the enforcement level to either warn the developer upon deployment or block them from deployment. So that gives you a lot of control, either to warn the developer to fix the problem or just make sure that that problem doesn't make it to the cloud account at the end of the day. So here I've got a handful of safeguards already set, from restricting regions, restricting stages, preventing deployments on a Friday, requiring dead letter queues. And what you'll see, if I go back over here and I go into my backend, I'm going to go ahead and do a serverless deployment. And again, upon deployment, you can see all those safeguards are pulled down from the serverless dashboard, and they're processed locally. So here you'll see a summary. It looks like any test runner's output of those safeguard features and what their results were. So again, it's scanned to make sure, number one, that I didn't have any wildcard permissions in some of my function resources here. It also prevented, deploy. It's not Friday, so this passed, right? If I had any Lambda functions that were asynchronous, it would have kind of required a dead letter queue, but I don't have that here, as well as I'm also using the allowed regions and the allowed stages. So I get a simple summary right here. And again, this is a great way to enable your developer teams to work with autonomy, and while making sure that they have some safeguards or some guardrails in order to not make any issues. So teams use this today in organizations, and individual developers use it just to make sure that they're not making any mistakes themselves. So highly recommend it. Again, comes out of the box with Serverless Framework. And once you get started, we actually give you a few safeguards that are just general best practices out of the box, so that you have some, and you don't need to set any of these up. So those are secrets, those are safeguards. I know I've only got a few minutes here, and then we have to go ahead and jump into some questions here, and I've covered a lot at a rapid pace. So I'll go ahead and we'll go over time to answer any questions in case any of you have a lot and we want to drill into any specific topics. But lastly here, there's another killer feature, and that is just notifications. All the alerts that I showed off earlier, new error type, a timeout alert, approaching timeout, unusual durations, escalated invocation counts, out of memory alerts, and in each stage across each service, you can actually configure them to either receive an email about these alerts. You could also have them be posted directly to Slack. You could even have them be sent out to an SNS topic if you want. A lot of people like this because then they can more easily write functions to just go address the issue, as well as webhooks. So you can set up just general webhooks to post all these notifications to. So all this stuff is available to you. Again, I think every single thing in here is available for free, up to 1 million invocations a month. And then lastly, if you want to add some team members to your organization, all you have to do is just go into this view and add them. You could add them via their email address. This will send out an invite, and you can add them as a collaborator or an admin. If they're a collaborator, they could deploy serverless services, work on the serverless services that are in your organization here. And if they're an admin, then they could start configuring the different profiles for your stages right here. Only admins can do this right now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I know that was a handful of features. Again, we've just shipped a whole bunch of stuff, and it's a lot to cover. But again, all this stuff is out of the box. Just deploy with Serverless Framework, and all this stuff is configured for you for the most part. And it's all free, up to 1 million invocations a month. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to any questions that we have here, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just look at the questions that Ashita has sent me, as well as the ones in the Q&A Zoom tab here. So it looks like Gareth, a teammate of ours over at Serverless Inc., is already jumping in to help out here. Let me see which ones are still open. Okay, Jonathan wants to know how to limit the billing model and where he could find the values. How to limit the billing model. So I'm not sure I understand the full question. I think it could pertain to a few things. Perhaps you want to limit the budget, perhaps that your developers can incur using their serverless infrastructure on the cloud account. That is something we don't have support for yet. However, we have a massive feature coming to address that we should announce in about a month here. It can address this problem as well as a handful of other problems. So we don't have anything for that specific issue today, but tomorrow we have something exciting that we'd like to announce there. Additionally, for limiting billing, for all things pertaining to kind of billing of Serverless Dashboard, we don't have any custom configuration on that yet. You simply just kind of chat with our sales rep and just discuss what it is that you're looking for. Michael has a question: can notifications be set in the YAML as well? And we've had that feature request quite a few times, and we're working on that. We think that's part of designing, capturing everything infrastructure as code accurately. we want to enable everyone to set as much of this configuration that we showed off in the dashboard in the YAML, so that everything is captured there, and you could see changes across that YAML more easily. So that's coming soon. Pitor says, how do you guarantee that my secrets stored on your servers will not be compromised? We encrypt everything, and you could follow up with one of our reps to learn more about the lengths that we go to ensure that your information is protected. Additionally, what we will be announcing soon is Serverless Framework self-hosted. So if that's of interest to you, you could actually have all of this stuff, everything that I showed, the dashboard product, everything, self-hosted on your own AWS account. And this is something a lot of our large enterprise users have been interested in. And if you're looking for just kind of guaranteed control and kind of that your organization only has access to everything, that might be the perfect option for you. And again, of course, we're Serverless Inc., so we built the entire Serverless Framework dashboard and all other hosted aspects to be entirely serverless. So it's a lot easier to host in your own AWS account. Michael asks, where can detailed information be found about configuring the serverless.yaml for specific AWS services like Cognito? Michael, the best place to go is our documentation. Our documentation is super robust. We've been working on it since 2015, and it has all types of configuration options for all types of AWS services, all types of AWS events. In fact, many people who just want to learn AWS Lambda and learn how to do general serverless stuff on AWS go to our documentation because it is a nice, organized, consolidated, focused view on doing serverless stuff on AWS. So, and there's a great search feature. The search feature is probably used 90% of the time. At least I use it 90% of the time. So you can easily search for Cognito and get information about that. Daniel asks, you mentioned no vendor lock-in. Am I understanding correctly that you're able to utilize services like Google Cloud Platform, Azure, or AWS in the same project, YAML? Yes. Now, the other vendor options are, some of them, to be frank, are still a little bit behind the AWS support that we have. As I showed off in the Serverless Dashboard, all those features only work for AWS today, but we're working with Azure, Google, and a lot more to make them work on all their platforms. But serverless.yaml, just developing and deploying your serverless application, that is possible today. You just switch out in the provider syntax in your serverless.yaml, swap that out with Azure or Google, and the serverless.yaml, for the most part, won't need to change that much. You might have to do a couple slight tweaks. But our goal here is to give you a common vendor agnostic experience so that you could switch these platforms without having to switch up your tooling, without really having to learn the underlying platform and all of the quirks of its serverless services as much, right? So we're trying to offer you that experience. We have an announcement coming in a couple weeks to enhance that, as well as our new serverless components projects, which are going to ultimately, hopefully, be a much better option for doing vendor agnostic serverless use cases. So go ahead and search for serverless components or look at our Twitter feed to see our announcement on that last week. Okay, moving down the list here, I see Chris says, my team prefers the .NET Core runtime. Windows stuff is typically and rightfully a second-class citizen a lot of the time. Is there anything to know about .NET Core support for the features you went over? Yes, this is on our list. Our features do not yet support .NET Core, at least the monitoring, the metrics, the alerting features. Now, Serverless Framework, the open source CLI, just for developing, deploying, we do have .NET support in there. It's been in there for maybe about 2 years. There are examples to help you get started with it. And so you could use that today, and hopefully we're about a month away from introducing .NET support in all of our other features. So by the time you maybe have something up and running, in a serverless fashion, we'll follow up with all those features out of the box so that you have the automatic metrics and alerting and everything else. Pitor asks again, can I assign multiple profiles to a single stage? Because it seemed like this one stage, one profile relation between them. Currently, you can only assign one profile to a single stage. I haven't yet heard a use case for having multiple profiles because the profiles are so customizable. You could easily go through them and add in all the secrets that you need, add in all the safeguards that you need. And as of right now, it seems like that's covering most users' needs. There may be a need for users to attach a profile to an individual service. We are thinking about adding that. It does add a new level of configuration complexity, so we're kind of on the fence about that. And maybe if you work with it and you have some feedback as to how to do this best, that would be really helpful for us. So as of right now, it's just one profile per application stage, though. Patris asks about serverless components. Are they prod ready, or is there any ETA? Serverless components is something we've been working on for 1.5 years. It's a simpler, easier way to deploy serverless use cases. And we just brought in support to serverless components into Serverless Framework last week. It's a very exciting project, near and dear to my heart, because the configuration files, in my opinion, need to get a lot simpler. You don't need to have verbose cloud formation syntax anymore. Even serverless.yaml files could get simpler. So we basically created these out-of-the-box serverless use case components that you could bring into serverless.yaml and deploy within seconds. Deployment is a lot faster. Deployment's a lot more reliable because once you know the use case, you can actually provision the infrastructure more reliably. And you get a lot more benefits. Like you could deploy a whole full stack application with a few lines of syntax. Basically everything I showed off here can be deployed in a single serverless.yaml with only a few lines of YAML. So check it out. Are they production ready? Right now, they're in a beta. So we're looking for feedback. We're looking to improve the specification and how they work. But again, we've been working on them for over 1.5 years. We have a ton of in-house domain expertise on how to provision serverless infrastructure and serverless use cases. And all that knowledge, a lot of our learnings in Serverless Framework in general have been baked into serverless components. So, so a handful of them are production ready, I'd say. And they're going to give you, developer productivity benefits like nothing else out there. So we're going to continue our support of serverless components. We have some big announcements coming on that front in just a few weeks, actually. And then you can expect a registry. Soon serverless components will be linked into the dashboard. So all the features I showed you will have, when you deploy your component, you'll have metrics out of the box in the dashboard. All that stuff is coming and a lot more because serverless components represents a way to bring a lot more interesting innovations to the market. Stuff that I don't think anyone else is doing in the serverless space or even talking about yet. So please look out for that and try components if that's of interest to you. Slava asks, what would happen if I reached the 1 million invocation limit? To be straightforward, nothing happens right now, actually. A sales rep will reach out to you and have a conversation with you, hopefully. But we're not going to go tear down your infrastructure. We're not doing anything like that. We're not going to block you. It's going to keep going. At some point, we're going to say, look, this is, we're doing a whole bunch of tracing. We're doing analytics, metrics, smart, intelligent analysis of your performance, all that stuff. And we would like you to be a paying customer. So we'll reach out to you to have that conversation. But again, as of right now, we're not kind of canceling your, affecting your infrastructure in any way. Okay, Chris says, you guys rock. Thanks for being awesome. You rock, Chris. I appreciate that feedback. That's what gets us out of bed in the morning. So thank you. This is a lot of the stuff that we're showing. It's just the tip of the iceberg for us. We think, serverless development has got to be easier and easier. All the stuff, the metrics, the alerting, safeguards, that stuff should just be given to you out of the box. In our opinion, developers should, they're the new kingmakers, right, and decision makers, and they're the innovators, right? They should have all the things that they need at their fingertips to, experiment, to innovate new products as fast as possible with metrics, alerting, all that stuff out of the box. So another part of this, though, that we didn't cover as much that I would like to take a second to speak to is the operations teams. So our goal with everything that we showed is to give developers and developer teams everything they need to be awesomely productive, right? To do incredible amounts of amazing work, with a lot of autonomy. to innovate and build amazing stuff with managing less. So that is how a lot of the serverless framework features that I showed you are designed. And what we're working on, though, with the notifications feature that we showed off, as well as a handful of other up-and-coming features, are just the right integration points to your ops team. Because ops teams have a different problem. They're usually trying to standardize all the different things that all the different technologies that teams are using, and they're trying to make sure that everyone's following organizational policies, regulations, and that everything is observable, and that customers at the end of the day are having a great experience. So what we're building is all the right integration points with standard tooling that ops teams use. So you can expect us to have integrations directly with like the Elk stack in the future, and a lot more features, technologies that ops teams are using. So that's our next kind of venture here. We already have great support for that in notifications already. So pretty much anything that happens, you can pipe that over to the ops team more easily. But hopefully this satisfies their needs while trying to keep developers awesomely productive. Peter asks, how does your dashboard gather information from my deployments? Can I provide separate AWS creds with read-only permissions for this functionality? So the Serverless Framework dashboard is designed to only take, so first off, the Serverless Framework, when it deploys, we capture a bunch of information kind of right then and there. We're not, after the deployment succeeds, kind of on your system, on your local machine when you run serverless deploy. And we're not really, the serverless dashboard isn't interacting with that. The serverless dashboard is just, it just gets that information that the deployment collects. So you can see everything that we're collecting on deployment just by looking, in the open source project and whatnot. Now, there are a few places where the dashboard can offer great functionality if you provided access, though, to your AWS account. So some of the logging features that I showed to populate logs, the dashboard will need access to your AWS account. However, you could turn off the dashboard's access to your AWS account. So that is a feature that's available to you. And we're making that easy so that people who don't want the dashboard to have access to their AWS account can turn that off. However, you won't get a lot of the great killer features. And then additionally, again, if this is a chief concern for your organization, check out the self-hosted version of the framework, which we'll be announcing soon, or just talk to our sales rep if you want to get in on the beta of that. And again, that's, if you don't want us having access to anything, then self-host the serverless dashboard on your own AWS account. Emra says, do you plan to support for distributed tracing? Yes, we've got a killer spans feature actually that we're announcing in about a week and a half. So that's coming. Out of the box span functionality, so you can see what's happening within your serverless function without any instrumentation, although you can still add in some custom spans in there if you'd like. So that's coming shortly. I could have shown that off today, but I think we're a bit out of time. And distributed tracing, we started with AWS API Gateway because that is the #1 serverless use case. Most serverless projects are serverless REST APIs. So we started with showing you API Gateway metrics right in the dashboard so you can see the full story for that use case. And up next, we're going into distributed tracing. Absolutely. This is a big goal of ours. You should see us announcing some features in about 1 to 2 months here. Okay, I think I answered all the open questions. And Gareth got through and answered a handful of these already. So you can look in the answered tab of the Q&A module in Zoom. But I think that's a wrap. We've covered everything. Slava adds in one more comment. Thanks for the amazing job you're doing. I'll use Dashboard as much as possible. I would appreciate the ability to use standalone installation, even as not enterprise. Yeah, so we'd love to chat with you about that. Just ping us on intercom in the dashboard. Or hello@serverless.com. But again, this is the tip of the iceberg for us. We've got a lot of functionality coming, and we're going to try and make it as easy as possible for you to manage serverless applications so that you could go do incredible amounts of amazing work while also making the ops team happy. So thank you all. Keep a close watch on us over the next 2 months. We're basically announcing something almost every single week. So follow along. Should be a pretty exciting time for us. And thank you all for being users, and looking forward to hearing your feedback and doing whatever else we can do to help you with your serverless development. All right, thanks everyone. Take care.